Now, if you ask me what is the most interesting game console that has released in the last 10 years, undoubtedly it has to be the Nintendo Switch. It is a hybrid system, it's underpowered by design. Nintendo really emphasized battery life pretty much above and beyond everything else. But sometimes there is a new discovery that comes out that just continues to amaze me. And in today's episode, we're going to take a look at how Sega Saturn emulation runs on the Nintendo Switch, albeit with we'll call it a hidden emulator that has been found in a recent commercial game release. The release of Cotton Guardian Force Saturn Tribute on the Switch comes with 3 individual games, and if you're a Sega shoot 'em up fan, you'll know exactly what these are. Cotton 2, Cotton Boomerang, and Guardian Force are all available to purchase either as that collection or as 3 individual games on the Nintendo eShop. But what's interesting about this release is rather than being native Switch ports, they are running emulation. Yes, that's right folks, Sega Saturn emulation is running on the Nintendo Switch. Sega Saturn is easily the most complex of the 32-bit systems to emulate. Its complexity comes from its hardware design. It contains 2 CPUs, 2 GPUs, and 4 additional custom processors. Not only was it incredibly difficult to program for, emulating the Saturn would be no easy feat. And while in more recent times there's been great strides on running Saturn emulators, it tends to require more powerful hardware. The Nintendo Switch on paper would be one such system that would be very challenging to run Saturn games on. And yet here we are with the Cotton Guardian Force collection. All 3 of these games run the Saturn emulation very well, with the biggest issue, and one that's very apparent especially if you play shmups, is the notable input lag. But let's move on. After the release of the games, it didn't take long for modders to data mine and identify that this is indeed running ROMs and emulation. And with some trial and error, it was discovered that by simply replacing the Saturn game found in the collection with another one, the game would boot other Saturn games. And I want to be clear that this discovery was found by members of GBA Temp, and I'll leave a link to that thread in the description below. But the takeaway here is that a very high percentage of Sega Saturn games run fine under this emulator, and in many cases those games that do run are at full speed on a stock Nintendo Switch without any other tweaks such as overclocking. So then, what is required to set all this up? Well, it goes without saying that you'll need to purchase a copy of either Cotton 2, Cotton Boomerang, or Guardian Force. These are available individually on the eShop or as a collection of all 3 games. Now, it goes without saying that you'll require a modded Nintendo Switch system, one that's hackable and one that can run homebrew and unsigned code. Now at this point you need access to a modded Switch system. Now we're not going to necessarily walk through how to set all this up because it's kind of out of scope of this video, because ultimately what I want to show is just how great Saturn emulation is on the Nintendo Switch. But let's assume that you are interested in setting this up. There is a pretty comprehensive guide on GBA Temp, and I'll leave a link to that guide in the description below. It pretty much walks you through everything you need to do, and setting this up if you have access to a modded Switch is actually quite simple to do. But essentially all you're doing is replacing the ROM with a different ROM, a different Saturn ROM that you want to play, as well as some ini file tweaks to do some decryption of specific data that the game is kind of looking for. But I was able to get this set up pretty quickly, and I got to say that the results themselves are quite impressive. Now this is running on stock Switch hardware. There is no overclocking or anything that I'm applying to these games right now. But the great news is some of the games that don't run as well can have overclocking applied to them to really boost those frame rates. But in my experience, a stock Switch really runs these games exceptionally well. Certainly a lot better than on something like RetroArch, which does have Saturn emulation, and I think it has to do with the emulation itself, known as the Zebra engine. Now, according to data miners, the Zebra engine is a fork or a branch of SSF, which is a pretty popular Saturn emulator that came out a long time ago, but it's considered one of the better ones because it's known for its performance and compatibility. All the games that I tried, some of my favorites including Die Hard Arcade, House of the Dead, Nights into Dreams, Saturn Bomberman, Sonic R, all ran pretty much flawlessly. Now, a couple of them ran slower, but thanks to the community, there are any file patches and other patches that can be applied to just speed up performance and get them running at full speed or close to full speed. So this is a very impressive effort overall. Now, the other thing that you have up your sleeve, of course, if you do have access to a modded Switch, is overclocking. So in the case of some games that just don't run well even with any file patches, a slight boost on CPU clocks can really just push those frame rates to where they need to be. Now, one area of the emulation where I think could use some work is the input lag. Now, the input lag isn't very good. It's probably, if I would estimate, probably about 7 or 8 frames, but that is just a guess. One additional piece of evidence to suggest that the Zebra engine may be perhaps a branch or a fork of SSF was that SSF was notable for having quite a lot of input lag. And this is something that's apparent in the Zebra engine. One kind of workaround of the input lag is to simply overclock. If you have a modded Switch, then you've probably got something like sysclock running in your resident memory area where you can actually just bring it up and then adjust the CPU clocks. Now, by pushing the CPU clocks a little, it does eliminate some of that input lag. Now, another area that took a little trial and error but is working fine is the 4MB expansion pack. Now, for some background, some Sega Saturn games required the addition of more memory to run, including games like Dungeons & Dragons, Shadow of Mystara, as well as Final Fight Revenge. And both of these are compatible and run at full speed without any issues. Now, I certainly haven't tested all the 4MB expansion games, and there are actually quite a few of them out there, but for the most part, 4MB Saturn games seems to be quite compatible with the Zebra engine. The emulation overall is of a very high quality. The VDP1 and VDP2 chips seem to be working exceptionally well. There's only been a couple of games that I tried that had graphical issues here and there, but for the most part, everything ran a lot better than what I had expected. And this is very encouraging to see Sega Saturn running on the Switch at this level of performance and this level of accuracy. So I really just wanted to show off Sega Saturn emulation running on the Nintendo Switch, really just to illustrate the capabilities and what's achievable. And at the end of the day, this is something that I would love to see continue, either via old collections or throwback games that we've seen with the Cotton games that have been brought to the Nintendo Switch, or the Nintendo Switch Online service, which in my opinion would really benefit from another system being added to it, given the price of entry to get access to the expansion option for the Nintendo Switch Online. The addition of something like Sega Saturn, which as you can see does run very well on the Nintendo Switch, would be a very welcome addition and one that I would absolutely love to see. There's also talk about Sega Dreamcast, but it's not necessarily known how well Dreamcast runs on the Switch at this time. But if we can get full speed or close to full speed Sega Saturn emulation running on the Switch, as we have, given what we've seen in this episode and on threads like GBA Temp, then I would love to see more Sega Saturn stuff appear on the Switch. But really, this was just a demonstration, illustration of the Saturn emulation running on the Switch. It's something that I kind of questioned in the past whether it was a feasible thing to do, whether you could run Saturn emulation on the Switch at full speed. But here we are. I mean, it is running exceptionally well, and the emulation is very good. But we are going to leave it here for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, don't forget to put a like on it, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye for now.